Hi everyone, I hope you guys are doing well. I welcome all of you to join with me for the fourth Sunday reflection of the Advent season. Dear friends in Jesus Christ, today our reflection starts with a question. This question seems to us that God is asking us personally, is there any place for me to make my dwelling place in you? As we approach the birth of Jesus Christ closer, this question makes us to think a lot. Is also an apt question right now to ask ourselves, did I become the dwelling house of God? We all know the truth that God is the omnipresent. He can dwell anywhere. He can be in any place at any time, in any objects. If He is an omnipresent, why does He need our hearts a dwelling place for Him? To find the answer for this question, we must read Mark chapter 7, verse 20. It says, "Whatever comes out of a person is that defiles them." In other words, if God is not dwelling within our hearts, anything that comes from our hearts may be unholy, may be sinful, that may be leading us to defile ourselves. So, in order to make ourselves holy, God must dwell within our hearts. And being a follower of Jesus Christ, being the believer of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 260 says, by baptism we all become the temple of God, God's dwelling place. We enjoy this privilege as being the temple of God, but at the same time, to continue that privilege, we need to follow two conditions which Jesus said to us. First condition, He says, we must love Him. The second condition, He says to us, to keep His words faithfully. That is what exactly Jesus in the Gospel account says. Whoever loves me will keep my words, and my Father will love him, and we will come to dwell in him. Dear friends in Jesus Christ, these two conditions really helps us to be the temple of God's abiding place. Exactly, this is what St. Paul taught us, that we are the temple of God. These two conditions, to love Jesus, to follow His words, does not stand alone by itself. It also carries along with themselves two other dimensions. The first dimension is having genuine respect for oneself. This should be tangible by taking care of our own self, body, intellect, and soul. Second dimension, having respect for others. This should become visible in our lives by treating others as individual as we are. And in today's Gospel reading, we have Mother Mary as the perfect example of being the temple of God. She lived as the temple of God till her death. There is no death for her, but she was taken to heaven with the life. By saying, I am the handmaid of the Lord, let it be done to me according to your will. With that, she became the perfect example of the house for God's dwelling. And she opened herself as a dwelling place here on earth so that she can go to heaven for her dwelling place in heaven. And in the first reading, we also read the King David. What he did is, he was ashamed of himself because he was living in a palace, cedar, having all the pleasure of the palace. But God, being the God of Israel, the Redeemer of the Israel, the protector of the Israel, he is living in a simple tent. So the King David thought, it is not wise enough that I live in the palace and God live in a tent. So he thought of building a temple for God. Though he thought of building a structural building, but for us, spiritual sense, it is our own temple, our own heart. God must not dwell outside of us. God must dwell inside of us. And there is also a concrete reason why God has to live inside of us. Jesus says, in my Father's house there are many places. I go there now and prepare for you rooms. What is there in the Father's house? There is comfort. There is joy and peace. And there is safety. As sons and daughters of God, if we allow God to dwell within our hearts, He will allow us to dwell in His house in heaven. And where is the Father's house? The Father's house is both in heaven and here on earth. Anyone who allows that privilege for God to dwell here on earth within our hearts, He will allow us to dwell in heaven in His place. So, dear friends in Jesus Christ, as we are approaching nearer to the birth of Jesus Christ, let us prepare our hearts as a real dwelling place for Him, so that He will allow in heaven a dwelling place for us. May God bless you all.